While the West Virginia Mountaineers are enjoying their week off, a much needed week off, so I truly imagine most of them are enjoying it, definitely the coaching staff. We here are still working at West Virginia Sports Now, and we have an episode here of Mountaineer Report for you. Mike Asti, and joined in a moment by my co host Luke Blain. We are going to touch on some off the field, but may impact on the field stories, some impact players of this season and their futures. Nicco Marchiol, the truth that I uncovered of what's really been going on, and mostly get Luke's take on it because I already got some news from what's happening kind of throughout my takes on his future and what really went down with his injury. Jahiem White looking like now he's coming back, and he kind of confirmed it, a little surprising. And then going to the next season of Mountaineer Sports, and that is the men's and women's, but we'll put a pin in the women's and maybe talk about them on a future show. But right now, the men's season about to get underway. Ross Hodge and players are talking. They talked today, actually. They are fully in their preparation for a new season. Year one with him, a whole new group yet again. Fourth coach in 4 years, but this one feels like it may stick a little bit more, and Luke is very optimistic, at least for the ceiling of this team. He put up a column on WVSN about that, so we will get him to unpack that further, and also Mark Kellogg, of course, and his kind of new era of his team with JJ Quinterly now in the WNBA. So again, we'll talk about that, I'm sure, on a future show. But Luke, how have you been? Of course, and it's a bye week, but it's a bye week that has some news. Leave it to West Virginia Sports to provide news during a bye week. They just never could let us sleep. I'm trying to take a break, and not that I wasn't working still, but trying to make this a calm week. And then my phone rings, and it's, hey, I have some news for you. I'd like to talk, and sure.
Oh yeah.
I'm not going to say no, but of course, during the bye week. I guess maybe I'd rather now than in a jam-packed week otherwise. Maybe it's a blessing in disguise, but how
Very
have you
true.
been? And I guess we'll start there. Nicco Marchiol. So it does look like he's going to transfer. I pretty much got that confirmed that he's going to transfer. No surprise there. We talked about that. That makes some sense. I also do kind of know that he wanted to come back. He wanted to return. He wants to be a Mountaineer for life. He was dug in this year, and he wanted to try again next year when he got healthy, and the program kind of told him, we're not interested in you being the starting quarterback anymore, and he's kind of going through the emotions from that. But the defense of Nicco Marchiol is that he played that Kansas game with -4 rushing yards, hurt, that he got hurt during the backyard brawl, may have got hurt earlier than that based on his injury and how long it's even been in his family. But it's actually pretty severe. He kept it to himself to defend Rich Rod, and Rich Rod, once he knew, was able to deal with it then. And Nicco, as we know, never played again after that Kansas game, which will end up being his final game as a Mountaineer. So he did have that comeback against Pitt, that miraculous comeback that maybe will be what fans maybe want to remember Nicco Marchiol for, those wins in the brawl and this most recent one. Injured, not even just hurt, but injured. But the other end of it is, and part of why I wanted to get it out there once I learned the real truth, because I think it's only being fair to the kid, that he may not play anywhere next year if he has surgery. So it does look like it possibly is the end of his career, let alone the end of his Mountaineer tenure. Maybe he could avoid surgery, but I'd imagine a torn ligament eventually is going to have to be dealt with under the knife. And if that happens, he may not play anywhere. Maybe quiets the noise of people saying that he was faking an injury, or the program and him are working together to get him out without having to have it be a stain on anybody for bringing him back or his play, and that this injury isn't legit, or saying he's doing the Tucker DeVries thing. None of that's true. He's hurt. He's really, really hurt seriously. It may put his career in jeopardy, and he's done as a Mountaineer. So when you learned my report and when more about his situation came out, what were your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I was always under, like we talked last week, I was always under the impression that if he's actually hurt, which, I did not that I doubted that he was, but a lot of people,
Right.
people like to
Right.
speculate about like you said, a certain men's basketball player and
I
head
think
coach
the
combo.
fans are in PTSD from that scenario.
Yeah, exactly. I think
Yeah.
that so I did see somebody say something funny that was like Rich Rod and Nico are both gonna go to Indiana next season, which was pretty funny. But I gotta I gotta say,
Yeah.
but I think this, I do have to think that I feel like there's a good chance that this wouldn't be the end of Nico's, football career if he, does opt to go for surgery. I think the players, go under surgeries like that all the time. It's a natural part of the game. I mean, a lot of
Yeah.
players end up bouncing back from that. So I believe, him paired with, his I believe I believe he's shown to have a very good work ethic and,
Yeah.
loyalty. I think that's great. I think it really is a little bit surprising to me that he wanted to stay. And maybe that's just because I was looking at that from a purely analytical standpoint,
Yeah.
but uh I think it is ultimately in his best interest to be somewhere else. And I think that, going into next season, I mean, if that's the way that if Rich Rod is dead set on having a running quarterback, which he flat out said he is,
Yes.
then
Yeah. Yes. 100%.
it just can't be. I don't think it can be Nico anymore, and that is a little bit.
Yeah.
It kind of gets you in the feels a little bit to say that because Nico has delivered some great moments for Mountaineer fans, and I just especially
Yeah.
hearing that he wanted to stay and wants to be that Mountaineer for life. I think that's awesome. But I think, looking at it from a realistic angle, he does need to go somewhere where he's not gonna take as many hits. He's not gonna be running as much. And I mean, I'm not saying that, you know, I'm not gonna speculate how the injury happened, but
Right.
in an offense where he's using his feet a lot more, a lot of people might imagine that that does happen, and I'm not saying Rich Rod was out there trying to kill Nicco Marchiol or anything, but it's just a natural part of,
Yeah.
football and that style of offense. And not everybody's built for it. I do think Nicco Marchiol is better suited for a system that is more pass heavy, more pocket presence heavy. And that also on the same side requires an offensive line that's better than the one WVU has right now.
Yeah.
Not saying they can't get better later and in future years, but it hasn't looked good so far this season. So I'm happy and sad a little bit for Nicco Marchiol, but I think this is ultimately it's a smart decision. And sometimes when it comes to football and it comes to your future, especially in these games, you have to think with your head and not with your heart as much. There's a good balance,
Yeah.
but this is the head decision that I think is going to benefit Nicco in the long run.
Yeah, and maybe this will make Mountaineer fans appreciate him more in a
Yeah.
way. I mean, I will say, I even put it in the report. I'm not going to hide from it. I had been saying for months that I didn't think he fit the Rich Rod system. I didn't think Rich Rod should bring him back. I didn't think it made sense. And maybe in retrospect, Rich Rodriguez and his staff maybe regret doing so because it did create this weird dynamic where he didn't fit. Maybe he was never fully healthy, but didn't fit. He's dead set on how the offense is going to look. It's always looked that way for 30 years, good or bad. It's going to be a dual threat running quarterback. He literally said, as you mentioned, that my offense will always have the quarterback running. So Nicco Marchiol can move a little bit, and they thought he could be Tyler Huff, but doing the Tyler Huff thing where you're not athletic and yet you gain yards, which is what they were really saying, that's not an athletic kid that gained 1,300 yards. That's what they were saying. But that's easier to do in Conference USA than it is to do in the Big 12. And it just didn't work out. Maybe they regret bringing him back. But I do think there's even an appreciation from Rich Rodriguez to Nicco Marchiol. He did say he's a winner. He got emotional for Nicco Marchiol leaving the game and showing moxie to come back and lead them to a win. And no matter where Rich Rodriguez's career ends and when it ends, I would imagine, Luke, that even 20, 30 years from now, he's always going to remember getting that revenge a little bit on Pitt and getting that victory in the 2025 backyard brawl, which even if they have a great tenure, that may be the last one. They don't play again until 29. I would also think, kind of from talking to him, that if Rich Rodriguez turns this around and is contending and wins a Big 12 title, he may hang it up before the contract's up. And if he's not, then maybe he's let go before the end of it because they're not just going to let him lose. They may not see another matchup between Pitt and Rich Rodriguez. So he maybe always will have that. And part of having that is he's always going to remember Nicco Marchiol coming back in that game was about Nicco Marchiol coming back in that game. And it looked like they were going to lose, and then they had a 10-point comeback and did in overtime. So they're always going to be attached weirdly in that way, despite only having a few games together. And I don't think it's a big what-if story for me of how Nicco Marchiol could have looked under Rich Rod, because I didn't think it was ever a fit. I kind of thought we'd get here. We talked on the last show. I don't know when he could have played otherwise, even under Brown. Garrett Green bought his time, and he was better at the time. You're not going to bench a guy who wins 9 wins and go to an inexperienced quarterback despite mop-up starts and having wins in that 23 brawl in Arizona. So it's unfortunate that a kid who wanted to be a lifelong Mountaineer and did come over as a top recruit when he had other opportunities. He was a 4-star kid who could have went elsewhere. He went across the country to come to West Virginia, really to join Neil Brown, was sold by Brown, and yet he never got an opportunity really to be what he was probably sold on 3 or 4 years ago during his recruiting. And he wanted to stay and do it again, and he bought into the hard edge mentality. He stayed with a new coach. You got to respect all of that. But so I think that is something that you pulled out of it. I mean, that is kind of the lost part of it. People always, I saw everyone trying to aggregate it. They were mostly referencing, okay, maybe his next season's in jeopardy. He's really hurt. Fans should, quiet the noise, etc. But what you bring up is true, that the hidden part about the story was the news that he wanted to come back, and the program basically said no. That does kind of suck. It was also interesting to me that a source was willing to say that, because you could argue that Nicco Marchiol's camp maybe wouldn't want that out. Does that make them look good? I don't know. The other part of the story probably does, but that's where it is now. But I think the something that needs accomplished here is that he's not faking injury. I mean, that right there, no matter anyone's opinion on Nicco Marchiol, and again, I don't think he fit the offense. He's not faking an injury. Maybe you give him the benefit of the doubt that he was hurt all year, maybe before the brawl, because it's a hereditary thing. His brother had his career end with a similar situation. I believe he even has flat feet, which is part of this, that I was told. But we don't know that, and what I've been told, it was in the brawl. So I can't say it was definitively before that, and the program just has seen enough to know that they want to go in a different direction. And I do think the right thing for the program is to either elevate Wilkins in the offseason, Scotty Fox in the offseason, have them compete with a veteran that you bring in, have it be maybe a Power 4 established kid if you have the money. If not, do the Jalen Henderson thing again, have them compete. Maybe you give it to Wilkins, who I do think showed a spark and looked okay at BYU. I do believe he showed a spark, more of a spark than anyone's shown all year. So you do that and bring a Nicco back and doing the Nicco thing again. I just think that's a fool's errand. I don't think that would work. And year 2 is going to have a lot more pressure. They can have this 4-win year now with all the injuries, but next year they got to at minimum make a bowl game. And I don't think you can do that with a kid who really doesn't fit your offense, even if you want to maybe do the right thing by him. So, again, wish him well. And maybe his career won't be over in general, but if he has surgery, that does likely wipe out all of next season, because a torn ligament surgery is a minimum of 12-month recovery. That's just how it is. That's where I'm getting that from. That's just how it is. I know that 12 to 14 months is what I was even told. So that would wipe out all next year. And not that I want him to have that situation, but if he ends up having surgery and misses all next year, then I think that people who owe him an apology, claiming he's faking injury, because you're not going to punt next season just to get out of West Virginia. So maybe that legitimizes that a little bit. Luke Blain here, Mike Asti, Mountaineer Report, West Virginia Sports Now. You can find this and every episode of the show everywhere you get your podcasts, also on YouTube, and of course throughout our WVSN network. Now, from the end of the Nicco Marchiol era at West Virginia, no matter what you think of it, and kind of clearing all that noise up, the full-on report of my story and what I learned from the sources at WV Sports Now, we now can move to maybe some positive news, maybe some surprising positive news for the program. And that is Jahiem White is progressing. He might be able to be a limited participant even at spring ball, which is only, 4 months from now. That would be kind of surprising. Maybe that's unlikely, but he's at least going to be a full go by fall camp next year, going to be ready for the season, which was even in doubt because he did have surgery. We know that. It looks to be an ACL tear from what I've heard. So that's kind of what I'm leaning to have been his injury, since that's not really been put out there by the program. But the other end of it is he's talking about next year. He's talking about coming back. It's going to be able to happen before next season. And it feels like Jahiem White is going to come back under Rich Rodriguez next year. And once he got hurt, even the noise in the press box, we were sitting there, everyone thought, oh, well, he's it. That's it for him as a Mountaineer. He's going to leave. He's going to transfer. He'll get the medical red shirt. He has 2 years left. He also wanted to leave before he had to be convinced to stay after Chad Scott left. So he's now going to go. And yet it feels like he may come back himself. He may be the one that comes back, and we may finally see Jahiem White under Rich Rodriguez and in that offense, and maybe even get 2 years of it because of the red shirt this year. What's your reaction to that? I'm a little surprised that he's kind of publicly digging in to coming back now in October. I thought he would at least wait to have an announcement in December, and he could change his mind, obviously. But as it stands now, he's pretty much confirming he's returning.
Yeah, I mean, my reaction was, that's a good get. I mean, just thinking about even for the, I
Yeah.
mean, that's kind of what happens in these situations whenever you have a high caliber player like Jahiem White on a team that is struggling as much as WVU is right now. And then that season-ending injury, I think that it's kind of all just kind of wired into our brains to just think, oh, well, off-season hit's probably going to be gone. And
Yeah.
I don't think it would have surprised a lot of fans if that were to
No.
be the case. So I think that, in just this offensive system that Rich Rod wants to run, if you get a mobile quarterback who actually you have to look at the threat of them
Yeah.
going off to the other side and taking it themselves, and you pair that with a player like Jahiem, it's going to open up plays for Jahiem, and it's going to open up plays for Khalil Wilkins, Scotty Fox, whoever's back there next
Yeah.
season,
Yeah.
veteran, whoever. So thinking of it in that context, it's like, man, because we're not going to get to see this offense at its full strength this season,
Yeah.
and I don't think we did even whenever
Yeah.
Jahiem was healthy. I think
No.
they were still working out the kinks. They were still, I mean, they were only up what was it, 7-3 at half or 10-3 to in the first game of the year,
To
something
even they didn't even look good against Robert Morris, and
exactly.
now and after into game 3, Nicco Marchiol was hurt, so you didn't get hit. You didn't get the mobile quarterback to help Jahiem White
Right.
out. The reason why Steve Slayton was able to be what I know he even told me that Steve Slayton believes Jahiem White can be the next Steve Slayton, but the reason why Steve Slayton was able to be the legend, nothing against Steve Slayton, was because it opened up by being with a mobile quarterback like Pat White. He'll be the first to say Pat White helped him be what he became, and they did it together. You got to talk about them together when you talk about that era of the Mountaineers. Jahiem White didn't have that in Nicco Marchiol. He did not have his Pat White. If he gets his Pat White, maybe then he can be the next Steve Slayton.
And we did see a little bit of that with Garrett Green. I think,
Yeah,
Garrett Green loved to take off. He made big plays with his legs the past
yeah,
couple seasons. He lowered his shoulder. He would drive right into defensive backs and linebackers, whoever.
yes, he
And,
would.
you just have to look at that in that kind of offense. I mean, that's why teams, even in the NFL, teams like the Ravens, Derrick Henry's still getting these big time games
Yeah,
because they have to look out for Lamar Jackson.
yeah,
Cardinals running backs tend to do pretty well because they have to look out for Kyler Murray. And
yeah,
if WVU can emulate that next season, which I am getting really close to being sold on Khalil Wilkins. I really like what I'm seeing from him. And
yeah,
he's making big plays with his legs. I mean, he had 23 carries for about 94 yards in the last game. Passing, arm talent needs to get a little bit of work, but he's a young player. That's going to come along. I firmly believe that. Garrett Green didn't have a big arm whenever he came in as a freshman or sophomore, whichever year that was.
hmm
Whenever he came in for, shoot, was he on a team with Jarrett Dagey? Am I correct in saying that?
originally,
Yeah,
yeah. When he first
yeah. I
got
can't
there, he
remember if he
wasn't really
came
doing
in.
anything then. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So I mean, just thinking about that in his progression, and he looked the biggest thing for me was Khalil Wilkins looked comfortable. And not to segue fully into Khalil Wilkins, but
yeah,
you get
yeah,
a quarterback who's comfortable in this system. You pair him with a running back who can thrive in that same kind of system. You go and you improve the O line in the offseason. Maybe some guys will get. Maybe we can see guys get better by the end of the year going into next season. But overall, I mean, just solidify the guys who want to be here. And I thought I was thinking about that. I think that's at the end of the day what Rich Rod was trying to do with Nicco is get guys in the building who want to
Yeah,
be
he
at West
wanted to be
Virginia.
there and he bought in. So
Absolutely.
why
Yeah.
not give him a shot? I guess might have been the thinking. Yeah.
Yes. So and now you know, and you need any bit of that you can get when you're starting out.
Yeah.
Now you're gonna if you can string together some games here at the end of the season, because WVU, I think WVU's, window is very, very close to being shut, if not shut already, to contend for the Big 12. But if you string together some wins, string together some good offensive games at least, you're gonna see players, whether they be freshman recruits, transfer portal guys, who are going to
Yeah.
say, I would like to be at West Virginia. And it takes that kind of success to make it happen. And that's kind of, I'd like to think that that's what the starting point was with Nicco Marchiol. And of course, Jahiem White's a guy you want in the building, even, no matter what.
Right.
But I think that, when it comes to building the team for the future, you need the guys who want to be at West Virginia. And that might sound like something that goes without saying, but, too often you get these players who don't necessarily want to be where they are, and they don't want to get coached hard, and they don't
Yeah.
want to fit into that certain style of offense. If you get the guys who want to be out there on the field, I think that in the coming years there is a high ceiling for WVU football. It's kind of hard to see right now with what we've seen being put out on the field, but WVU has a chance here at the end of the season, or on the back half of the season I should say, to put together sort of a resume of wins for players who might want to come and be part of a fast tempo offense with
Yeah.
a running quarterback and a good running back, and just somebody that a team that moves and scores. So I think that there's still reason to play. I think
Oh yeah, yeah. When
The
you're in
BYU game showed
100%.
that. I mean, a lot of fans will check out now because WVU is not going to win the national title, which if you would have told me that they were before the season, I would have
Right.
called you insane. But
Right.
I think, looking at WVU now, right now, the idea is to look for opportunities for improvement and just better signs of things to come.
Yeah, and not to say the pressure's off because it's year one and it's not the end all be all. So that's part of maybe the pressure not being as high as it would say be at this point next year if you're enduring the same situation. However, Rich Rodriguez did talk a lot in the offseason that, hey, we can win right away. We're going to win right away. Signetti did it. Arizona State did it. We can do it too. I want my guys. I believe this team can win. The coaching staff's right to win. So I'm going to hold them accountable for all of that. In a 4-win season, not making a bowl, even with the injuries, would be below that standard and kind of unacceptable off of what he said. But now that it's here and you have all the injuries that you can kind of use as an excuse for this year, if you just had this year with everybody healthy and no drama, and then you win 4 games, then you kind of look like, what the hell were you talking about in June or in May or in December, in January, February, every month that he was saying all of this. But with all these injuries, it's a little bit of an excuse for Rich Rodriguez. You do have the Pitt win under your belt. You kind of now, honestly, Luke, you could argue he's getting ahead of the recruiting game a little bit of the current team accidentally, just off of what we're talking about on the show. He doesn't have some of this decision making is being made for him. He's sitting there now saying, okay, this year is about evaluating talent. We got to figure out who the players are. He's not going to confirm or anoint anybody or crown anybody this year. I'm sure he liked a little bit of what he saw from Khalil Wilkins. He said that after the game, but I'm sure he'll want to see more. He'll probably give Scotty Fox his look too, but now he knows for sure. And he already told Nicco Marchiol that he's not the guy, but now he knows, okay, we're moving on from Nicco Marchiol. We tried it, didn't work. We're moving on from him. Now he probably can think, and nothing's for sure until you sign again, but now he can think, okay, now I can build around Jahiem White back as a running back. I don't need to go get an RB1. I got Jahiem White as my top running back. Cam Vaughn is somebody that he's still very much in love with. He does have pieces that he can say in his mind, I got a little bit of a crew that can come back here next year if I figure out how this will work the rest of the year. And I am too. I know he's going to give Scotty Fox some time, and he's earned a time maybe to get a start or two even before this year's over if they're way out of it. But for me, so far, I do think Khalil Wilkins offers a higher ceiling in the offense. I do think he's provided the biggest spark of anybody who's played, including Scotty Fox, in the offense as both a runner and a passer, even though he needs to improve certainly through the air. And I do think, from what I even heard from past coaches and these coaches and everybody around Khalil Wilkins, that Rich Rod may fall in love with him and see Pat White in him. And if that happens through a whole off season, giving him the spring, giving him the fall, and yes, he should compete with Scotty Fox or a veteran or whoever. I would imagine, Luke, that if Kalu Okins keeps on starting the rest of the year and performs, Scotty Fox is going to transfer. Fine. And then you bring in a veteran to compete with him. Henderson obviously will be done as well, because that's also not worked, and eligibility will be a thing for him. But Rich Rod can kind of figure this out by the end of the year and have something in his mind to then go and spring ball with. And maybe what everyone wants to hope for is he leaves the year saying, okay, Kalu Wilkins is my guy. I got a receiver still. I got a couple of defensive players still. Hopefully he brings back his coaching staff for him, and maybe Zach Alley leaves, but maybe he doesn't get an opportunity because the defense has been up in the air. Maybe they bring back the staff, and, Jahiem comes back based on what we're hearing from Jahiem. And then you're Rich Rodriguez and you go into the portal still, but instead of 80 new players, maybe it's 40. And that's still a lot, but that's half. And that's a big difference to be dealing with than a full-on 80 and try to even get to know their names, let alone try to evaluate anybody. So, and maybe you don't have to do it because also, Luke, he's kind of had something help him a little bit in his obsession with evaluating the roster, because what we didn't mention, and I'll just throw that out there, of course, now there's going to be one transfer portal window, not two. There's going to be one. Great. There's no longer the one in the spring. If you lose a job, then you're kind of screwed for player. I do get why they may be mad about it, but there should be one. There shouldn't be two. It's not going to be the hectic of two portal windows in 30 days. It's going to be one now. And maybe Rich Rodriguez won't be able, he's almost been saved from himself a little bit. He won't be able to bring in transfers and then say, no, I don't really like you. You're gone, and bring in a new set of transfers. You're kind of doing it once now instead of twice. So maybe it'll be a little bit of a calmer and easier offseason for him. And we'll see if they can continue to get the money right, which it's not, but they're doing things. I mean, again, the announcement of the added scholarships, that's a step in the right direction and proves that they are having success off the recent Board of Governors meeting and Ren Baker doing work. So if that keeps on happening and they keep getting the $20 million every offseason and keep getting their full rev share, that'll help too. And it's a winnable conference. They're not in the SEC or the Big Ten. So that's kind of a glass half full take with this year being so bad that you have to, you're really evaluating Wilkins above all else, and maybe Fox, and see what happens the rest of the year. But I do think Wilkins showed something at BYU that we had not seen all year, that they haven't, announced him yet, but if I'm Rich Rodriguez, you got to be starting him at UCF. You got to give him one more start, and then you got to keep on seeing it after the bye. And now maybe they get healthier, and you can also get Kalu Wilkins in another full week or 2 weeks to prepare for a team that he didn't have before. Luke Blain, Mike Asti here, Mountaineer Report, West Virginia Sports Now. We will have a lot more. Of course, the football season not over, even if you think it is over for you as a fan. It's not over, literally speaking. And this coaching staff has a lot of work still to do. And they have scored a couple recruiting wins, which you can also find on the site, that despite not winning, these recruits are liking something they're seeing from Rich Rodriguez. So to Luke's point, maybe you keep on doing that. And maybe everybody likes something based on how this year finishes, and ending strong will be the way to sell the program and provide some optimism. And then you can just say year one injuries, don't get too mad. But if you just don't win a game again and you look awful the rest of the way and come out of the bye week slow, then we're going to hear the criticism again, and it'll be very, very valid. So we'll see what happens after the bye. But also after the bye week, and then at the end of the month, the men's basketball program in particular, women too, but the men's basketball program in particular, because they have a new head coach, fourth head coach in 4 years, but it looks like it's one that's going to stick for at least a couple of them, in Ross Hodge. This is now the Ross Hodge era. He's brought in a roster that really fits him and what he wants. He brought in a lot of winners, didn't bring in a power forward transfer, didn't bring in the Tucker DeVries or Javon Small of recent years, but did bring in some players that power four schools did want, brought in some scorers, brought in some defenders, some size, even though they still want to be bigger. He's working with that team now and a couple weeks away from debuting it on the floor. You wrote a column for WVSN that you think the ceiling is actually higher this year than last year's. And that might have made sense going into the season last year, but the pushback, I guess, would be that team really should have made the tournament. They kind of got screwed. They should have made the tournament. They had 3 top, ranked wins, 2 of them top 10 wins. against Kansas and Gonzaga. The Kansas game is a game that they never win when you're talking about doing it at Kansas, and they got it done under DeVries. So despite the drama, they did succeed in a way, certainly for a year one, but you think this year even has a higher ceiling. So why?
Yeah, well, I think it comes down to a few things. Ross Hodge is really bought into the defensive mindset, and that's everybody knew that about him coming into it. That's the type of game he ran at North Texas. And I did mention back in the summer that I was a little bit wary whenever I heard that because I immediately envisioned a team like St. John's. And St. John's, it's like, why wouldn't you want to be a team like St. John's? And it's because their
Hmm.
defense turns into offense, and then when they get put into the half court offense, they struggled. They struggled a lot. That's why they lost in the second round of the NCAA tournament. It's very important that you have that offense to pair with defense, and he has some offensive like firepower here with Honor Huff, who led the league,
Yeah.
who led the nation in three-pointers made. Tracy Eaglestaff is a big-time scorer who has done it against Power Four teams. And back to your point, this is a lot of people will say that this team, they don't have Power Four experience. It's all G5, G6, but
Yeah.
these are players that those Power Four teams wanted. I mean, they flipped Eagle staff from South Carolina, an SEC school, and the
Yeah.
SEC just dominated the college basketball landscape last year, no
Yeah.
questions asked.
Right.
And the SEC was the new Big 12 last season,
Yeah.
and they had just flipped him into a Big 12 school, a Big 12 school who was middle of the pack last year, who missed the tournament, even though they should have made it.
Right.
And it's just coming down to that. And just there's more depth to this team this year. There's more scoring depth, there's more ball handling depth. And we kind of saw that lack of depth get exposed last season whenever you had players like KJ Tenor, like, getting very, very big minutes. And nothing against KJ Tenor. I think he's got a really good ceiling. I think I really
Yeah.
do like him as a player. I like him as an offensive facilitator.
Yeah.
But there are plenty of players on this team who are going to be able to go out there off the bench and score. And one of them that Ross Hodge kind of already nullified my what's the starting lineup for WVU this year line thing because he said Brendan Lorient will be in the starting lineup, which I think will be a great decision. I just want to say my thought process was that Brendan Lorient just won the AAC Sixth Man of the Year award, which is a great,
Yeah.
that was kind of like I literally had it typed out that Brendan Lorient was going to be in the starting lineup. And then I deleted it and switched it for Chance Moore with a more of a four guard lineup, and then Obioa down low. But I think
Yeah.
that's great, and it's not like, and that's the thing is that there's barely enough room in this starting lineup to capture the talent because Chance Moore is a great player. He had a big year last season. Harlan Obioa, they finally have that dominant paint presence that they kind of missed out on last year. Nothing against Eduardo Andre or Amani Hansberry, but they were undersized. That was flat out a team that
Yeah.
was undersized. And this team this
Very
year
much so.
is
Yeah.
on average a whole inch taller, but that's kind of dispersed a little bit more. And assuming they can stay healthy, because I do want to give last year's team a lot of grace because there were a ton of injuries and a lot of it was put on Javon Small.
Yeah.
But there's a lot more scoring capability coming into this season, and I really just like the roster that Ross Hodge has put together. It felt like every time there was a new signing, it was like, oh wow, that's a great get. There's more height on this team. There's more height in the ball handling facility, especially. And, there's some really good rebounders in Obioa, Lorient. You have Jackson Fields who can go down and play low, but he can also shoot it from the outside. I
Yeah.
think just in every aspect of the game, I just feel a little bit more confident heading into this season than I did last season because
Yeah.
I'm not going to say nobody. I didn't expect Javon Small to become what he was at WVU. We
No.
hadn't
No.
really
Yeah.
we hadn't really seen that from Oklahoma State. I don't think a lot of people did, and good on him for surprising me and a lot of college basketball
Yeah. He
fans
was a
all
number
across the
three
country.
scorer at Oklahoma State. He was not their
Yeah,
leading scorer at all. He was more of a role
yeah,
player
exactly.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, so more of a role player, and now, but you have these guys who are established leaders in different facets. And, I think that's the great part about the secret scrimmage coming up, which, as somebody who's played sports, as somebody who grew up
Yeah.
playing sports, in the preseason, you get sick and tired of playing against your teammates all the time, and you want to be put into game-like
Yeah.
situations.
True.
And, every team talks about that going in. You hear that from the NBA to the NFL,
Yeah.
and it's just, they want to get out there and try to go toe to toe with another team and see how they match up as a complete team. And that's what they're going to get the chance to do against Maryland. I'm excited to hear about that goes because apparently it's not even a secret anymore. We can just say it. Like they're playing against Maryland. And like that kind of
Yeah.
caught me off guard, but they did change the rules about how you go about doing that. And it's like
We learned
apparently
about it last year too, if you recall, that it wasn't really a
oh
secret last
shoot.
year either. So the secret
Oh, you're
scrimmage thing
right.
has kind of gone away, but they
Yeah.
still tried to sell it as a secret last year.
Yeah.
But then, if you remember, they sold it as a secret, and then I believe the next day they threw up a little bit of a small video to basically, here's what happened. It's like, well, okay,
Yeah.
so now it's just a publicized scrimmage. But yes,
Yeah.
so that'll be interesting, and that also is another
Yeah.
program that also is going through a facelift of their own. They had a coach with
Hmm.
even drama. They had that Sweet 16 run, but that was the first time in a long time. Weirdly enough, one of my best friends covers them. They just unveiled a really, really nice practice facility, but it's very similar of look to what West Virginia has going on. So it's funny they didn't do that decades ago, and in the past, West Virginia's had theirs for a decade now. But that'll be interesting barometer. It's kind of a similar program in another power conference, obviously in the Big Ten, that was good last year, even though it's a different cast of characters now with the Terps. So that'll be interesting. And yeah, Russ Hodge even talked about that today, that they kind of are getting sick of playing against themselves. Even just hearing from him, they want to actually be able to figure out how refs are going to call things against somebody else. Obviously, you never want to go full head of steam against your own guys before a season. You don't want to get somebody hurt or ankle break somebody on your team, but against an opponent, you may not mind doing that. You can kind of gauge yourself differently. So that will be a positive, I think, for this team. Now, for fans, if they happen to lose the secret scrimmage, it's obviously no reason to not show up to games and have the season be over. It is a scrimmage. It does not matter really what the result ends up being. They're going to have an exhibition as well before they fully tip off the regular season at the end of the month, or the exhibition and then the regular season in early November. But still, that will be nice. And I do think they're kind of sick of dealing with each other. But that is a major point that I think people are missing, that yes, they don't have the one power four guy that they admitted they even wanted to originally get, and they didn't get that guy, and that would be ideal. But they didn't get that guy, but they did flip players who other schools in the power four did want. Eagle Staff in particular was a legit flip from South Carolina. Brendan Lorian and others, they had offers from other power fours, even if they weren't, flipped officially. They had offers from those schools. So they were in the mix with other power fours and beat them out and did a flip. And that's a positive recruiting wise. And Eagle Staff in particular, too, I would imagine if this team is good, he's going to be the leading scorer. He's going to have 20 plus 30-point games, probably at some point, not every night, but at some point, he's going to have those for this team to have a really quality year. And while people always have been saying that just because he scores 40 plus where he was doesn't mean it's going to translate to the Big 12, especially a conference that prides itself on being such a sound defensive conference. He had some of those top scoring games against power programs. He had 41 against Bama. That was a good team. So he didn't just do this against a lower level competition. He didn't only score those points in a mid-major situation. He did it against power schools. So that's something I think they can hang their hat on and they can assume is going to translate to the year, but we will see and we won't know until we get there. Their schedule, you could argue, is a little tougher in the out-of-conference play than DeVries's was. So that could be a difference that you have to look at it this way, Luke, and you know how fans are going to freak out. They may have a worse record in out-of-conference play, but be a better team. The schedule is going to be a little bit tougher, but it might gear them up to be more battle-tested for the Big 12 play, because what happened last year, and obviously Tucker DeVries' injury killed them, but Javon Small was able to carry them through some of those big wins. They had 3 ranked victories and 2 of those in the top 10, and yet didn't make the tournament. Why? Yeah, they got screwed, but also because they lost to a lot of teams they shouldn't have lost to. And they started getting exposed at the end of the season, and they did lose that Colorado game early in the Big 12 tournament. They never should have lost to them. They were a bad team. I think Ross Hodge is trying to build a team that's not going to endure that many bad nights. And they may not have the Kansas win in Lawrence or a Gonzaga victory to hang their hat on like DeVries' team did, but maybe they're a better team overall because they're more consistent, and maybe that eventually gets them in the NCAA tournament. But I do think the expectations to Ross Hodge have to be at least on the bubble. I don't think he has to necessarily get in for fans to be bought into the era, but I think he needs to do close to what DeVries did. I don't think he can handle a 9-win year and do the Josh Eilert thing. I think fans would say that shouldn't happen with this team and off of what just occurred with another coach a year ago. So as we kind of round things out, I know you said there's a higher ceiling than last year, but as we're still a couple weeks out from this really tipping off, what are your expectations in terms of what do you think would classify a good year and what do you think would classify a failed year one?
You know, I think a good year would see a good start, obviously. I think you need to be able to win comfortably, of course, against Mount St. Mary's, Campbell, and Lehigh.
Right,
That kind of goes without saying.
right.
I do think a backyard brawl win would ignite this fan base, and it's
Yeah.
back home in Morgantown,
Lost last
and
year.
they lost last year, and it wasn't pretty last
Lost
year.
a
I mean,
couple
of
years ago.
course, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think you have to look convincingly like a Big 12 at least upper middle half team through through the non-con. I'll say that because you have your chances. You're gonna have your it's not like you're gonna get there and you're gonna be whatever because you're playing bad teams. You got a
Right.
couple challenging games
Yeah.
at the Thanksgiving Invitational. You have Pitt, you have Wake Forest on a neutral court, but it'll be WVU fans in the building. And you also have Ohio State and things
Yeah.
like that. I do man, I think if this roster, I don't know why I'm just so optimistic about this team specifically,
They could be
but
playing well and lose those games, though. It doesn't mean the year will be over, but
that is
that
true.
out of conference schedule is a little tougher than last year. Usually, you end up in the last several years, even going back to Huggins, you normally would get the brawl, and maybe you get one other game in a tournament, like when they did beat Gonzaga last year or had a Purdue matchup. In a tournament, usually you get one more, but this year they're going to get 2 or 3 more outside the
Yeah.
brawl because they're putting themselves in multiple tournaments to see those power competition. And Ren kind of admitted that it's to battle test them even more. And they also think it would improve the strength of schedule enough that if they have a similar record even to last year, they then would get the nod. They're trying to fix the wrong of last season. And if that didn't work, they got to do something new schedule wise. So, but it could lead to a worse record, even if they
Yeah.
are a better team before the new year.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely true. I do think that there's a good chance that you maybe just enter conference play with 2, 3 losses.
Yeah.
I think there's an opportunity for that. And going into the Big 12, I mean, it just feels like it's such a toss-up every year. But you get Cincinnati, well, I mean, that it is, but you
Yeah. Oh,
get
yeah.
Cincinnati twice. They're not atop of the, league Big 12 team. I'm trying to think and try to count up. UCF is not, you have an opportunity for 4
Right.
games where you might even be favored
Right.
in conference play, and that's
Yeah.
big time when it comes to standings. You want those lower half teams. Trying to look through, I'm not sure if there's anybody else who they play twice. Um, but looking at that, so to get back to it, I think a successful season, like you said, would be a bubble team. An absolute disaster 10 or below. I think that's, there needs to be some sense of momentum going into this season
Yeah.
and throughout it. And, I'm assuming the team stays healthy. Obviously, if all 5 starters end up hurt for long periods of time,
Sure.
then
Sure.
you
Yeah.
can kind of give them a pass.
Yeah.
But I love the potential for this WVU team. I think they're in a system that favors them. I think they're in a system that's going to favor them, specifically in the Big 12.
Yeah.
It's such a defensive minded league, as Ross Hodge has loved to mention. But, I mean, this team's got a chance. This team's got a real chance, I think, at the Big 12. I can't fully put it into words right now. I'm probably gonna have
Yeah.
to sit down and do a lot more research before
Yeah.
the coming of the Big 12 season. But I think that, I feel like I am more optimistic about this team than I was last year's team going into the season. And, that mainly because the main bright spots were Tucker DeVries and kind of Javon Small, even though he wildly exceeded
Yeah.
expectations.
Yeah. We didn't know at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, who could have? I mean,
Right. Yeah. I mean, that if somebody would have told you before last season that Tucker DeVries is only going to play 8 games and they're going to even be a bubble team, people would
yeah,
have said you're crazy, because Tucker
yes,
DeVries was the NBA prospect that Charles Barkley said before that year he's the guy. He
yep,
only played the 8 games for whatever you want to believe, conspiracy theory or injury or whatever. Javon Small was able to ascend, exceed expectations, and that's why they were a bubble team. He actually was a Big 12 Player of the Year candidate for a significant portion of the year. And again, I think to what you're saying as well, that fans need to understand, they may not win in Lawrence. They may not have a top 10 win, but they might still be a better team and maybe still make the tournament. They have enough quality games on the schedule to still get there. And Ken Palm's a real thing that even if they play close in games against great competition, that might actually even be better than beating a bottom feeder. That's the way college basketball works. So they have those opportunities to really kind of beef up that resume, and they might have a team that won't rely so much on one player. If Eagle staff has an off night scoring, they have other players that can score. Whereas once DeVries went out of the lineup, if Javon Small had an off night scoring, which he did a couple nights, they had almost no chance. And their
yeah,
offense just completely collapsed. They had no offense, even though they had a great defense, but the offense was barely ranked in the top 100 in overall college basketball. That can't work. That got to be closer together. But this is going to be a solid defensive team. Every Ross Hodge team always is. You got to be bought in or he won't play you. And there should be enough on offense. There should be sharpshooters there. Again, I think at the very least, this should be a really entertaining team to watch. I think they should be a fun team to watch and cover, maybe even more so than last year, because admittedly, even in some of those wins, it really wasn't that fun watching Javon Small try to do it on his own and then them try to crawl through games and win it with 60 points because they had to do it on defense. Maybe they'll win low scoring this year, but I think there's going to be more room for excitement and big shots and 3-point daggers from Eagle staff and company. And I'm relying on Sean Mariner and the crew to do something with an eagle and have an eagle be landing on the
you have
jumbotron
to
whenever
imagine he's
he's.
already thinking about that.
Yeah, I'm sure all that's in the already in the works and already done and ready in the can. But that has to occur here for Eagle staff. But I think this is going to be a fun team to watch. I think Ross Hodge is at least bought in for 1, if not 2 to 3 years. I don't think he's going to be leaving after 1 year. I don't think he's going to get an Indiana offer, but I also don't think he's going to want to leave. Him and Ren Baker are friends enough that I think he's going to build this. And I think having a coach that's going to build this and do it in a way that fits the Big 12. He keeps mentioning I'm copying Houston. Well, Houston's been dominating the conference. That's a good team to copy. So maybe he's ready to go. We will see. And he has a lot to prove
Yeah,
himself as well. He doesn't have the experience of doing this either. And it was a controversial hire in that way. So he has to prove himself. This roster has to prove themselves. They're going to have room to do it. We're close to getting that tipped off. And maybe they'll have more luck than Rich Rodriguez and the football team. Knock on wood to what you just said there about the injuries, that they don't have to deal with Eagle staff, Lorient, Thomas, Honor Huff. If they all get hurt, then it all goes up in the
yeah,
air. I mean, if that's the equivalent of Nicco Marchiol and Jahiem White and Jaden Bray, if they all do that and have that type of year with all the injuries, then of course they don't have a chance. But assuming health, this could be a team that has a fighting chance. I do think if they're even a bubble team, that's a big win for year one. Anything more would be a major success. And, maybe the world's not over and sky isn't falling if they're not even a bubble team, but they certainly have to get into the teens and have a solid run of competitiveness and get a solid number of wins. If it's a 9-13 year or something like that, if it's a 9-win, 12, 13, 14, if it's any of those numbers in terms of win total, then yeah, everything that was said about the hire maybe is true and that there's room for criticism there. But I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that's going to occur. I don't think the win total is going to be that low. I would think here the floor of a win total is probably more around 15 to 16 and maybe 19 to 22 is more realistic where they get 19 did get him in the tournament in the past, even at the end of Huggins. We will see what happens though, and they have to hope Bubba Cunningham is not going to be calling the shots about who gets in again this year. Enough to worry about there in North Carolina with Belichick and company, and he's kind of been run out of the building anyway. So it won't be up to him now. But moving forward, we will continue to cover what's going on with the Mountaineers basketball-wise before their seasons tip off here, and also the rest of the football season and more throughout Mountaineer Athletics. Luke Blain, Mike Asti here. Find us everywhere you get your podcasts, your Mountaineer Report on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, TuneIn, Google Play, etc. And also, of course, our coverage is at West Virginia Sports Now.